Joining us now is Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation magazine. Chris, thanks very much for joining us. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Rachel.
So the House just moments ago voted to pass the fixes to the health reform bill. A few weeks ago, the idea that this thing would have to get pinged back to the House was almost a doomsday scenario for Democrats, but tonight it passed pretty easily. What does that mean?
There is no surer sign of how much the political situation, the momentum has changed than the way that the parliamentarian ruling out two small items in the Senate patch and sending it back to the House, that was met with just a minor shrug. The House said, okay, cool, we'll pass it tonight. A week ago, that would, like you said, it would have been a doomsday scenario because the health reform bill was beginning to feel like Zeno's paradox. You know, it was like it would always go half of the way. It was never going to finally get there. And I think that this shows that the momentum has switched entirely. The House is able to just take it back and get it done in a day.
The old way that Republicans were fighting this, whatever they felt about the kind of political capital it gave them, the kind of momentum it gave them in process, at the end it didn't work. They didn't win. They didn't end up looking very good in the process to anybody other than their base. But they did, in fact, energize their base at least for a time. What do you think their ultimate political... what have they reaped ultimately politically from this year of process?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I think ultimately it was, like you said, it was a high-stakes bet that lost. I mean, the situation they find themselves in, David Frum, who, you know, was a conservative commentator who sort of was one of the very few who said this was a mistake, this strategy, and today he lost his job at AEI. He had this great quote the other day. He said, the Republicans used to think that Fox News worked for them, and now we realize we work for Fox News, which is to say, at this point, I think the tail is wagging the dog in terms of the relationship of this very activist base to Republican Party officials. And what's going to be really interesting is, are they going to be able to move in any different direction? Are they able to be more conciliatory, have a more kind of, back and forth about legislative strategy, or is that discipline going to be enforced by the base that has become so powerful over this year in which they've pursued this strategy?
It is hard to imagine, even as I was able to find evidence today, just in today's news, the last couple of days' news, in terms of Republicans really breaking with this unified front strategy on same-sex marriage, with Corker on financial reform, right, with Lindsey Graham on that procedural issue with Jim Webb. You're able to find this evidence, but it does seem like there's this big problem. I mean, if this is socialism, if this is the end of a constitutional republic, if this guy is a Kenyan Marxist Nazi or whatever, to the extent that they've adopted that rhetoric, haven't they hamstrung any future efforts to work with him?
That is exactly right. They're totally painted into a rhetorical corner insofar as they have, at every juncture in this first year and 2 months of the Barack Obama administration, they have painted things in maximalist terms. They have sort of created the most apocalyptic stakes for every legislative battle. And they have also chosen incredibly philosophical and ideological terms on which to have the debate. And once you're at first principles, once you're at ideological impasse, there is no place for negotiation. And so that's the place they're in right now. It's extremely difficult to imagine a scenario where they say it's time to sit down with the Marxist, Kenyan-born subverter of American values to hash out this minor technical language on financial reform. The base is going to rebel. Now, the question is, do they say to the base, you know what, screw it, you got us into this problem, or do they listen to them? My bet is that they listen to them.
Well, that's going to be the single most interesting and I think totally unpredictable thing about
Absolutely.
Politics in Chapter 2 here. Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation, thanks for joining us for immediate response to this historic vote, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Health reform is law. The debate over whether or not to adopt it is over. Democrats won, Republicans lost. Which does not mean that Republicans can't still be opposed to health reform. It just means the way they're opposed is changing. All the made-up stuff about death panels and secret plots to kill old people and secret plots to kill veterans and special needs children, those have passed their shelf life at this point. Since as the reforms go into effect and no death panels convene, kind of loses its impact to say they're coming, right? Well, now the fashionable way to show off how opposed you are to health reform is with a lawsuit. filing lawsuits against the government alleging that health reform violates the Constitution. Today, the Republican governor of Georgia, Perdue, went so far as to announce that he will appoint a special attorney general whose sole job will be to sue the government over health reform on behalf of the state of Georgia. You might be asking yourself, why does Governor Perdue of Georgia need a new attorney general just for this one very special lawsuit? It's because when he asked the real attorney general of Georgia, Democrat Thurbert Baker, to file this lawsuit, Mr. Baker looked into the matter and determined that it would be a futile exercise. It would be a giant waste of Georgia taxpayers' money. The real attorney general of Georgia said plainly and publicly that there is, quote, no viable legal basis to challenge the health reform law. But get me a new attorney general then. The purported legal basis for these latest anti-health reform lawsuits, is that they say it's unconstitutional to require everybody to have health insurance. Now, even as Republicans really want to support these lawsuits, this is an awkward argument for them to make. Let me tell you why. Take Mitt Romney, for example. Mitt Romney is trying really hard to be against the mandate in health reform that you have to get health insurance. The problem is, Mitt Romney's own health reform plan that he passed in Massachusetts, it has the mandate too. Up until now, his tiptoe around this has been that the mandate from a state government is okay, but the mandate from the federal government, well, that's obviously evil and wrong and unconstitutional for some reason. Then the Democratic National Committee unearthed and circulated this piece of video from Mitt Romney from the 2008 election cycle.
Although you've backed away from mandates on a national basis.
No, I like mandates. The mandates work.
Beg your pardon? I didn't know you were going to admit that.
No, absolutely.
You like mandates.
Let me tell you what kind of mandates I like, Fred, which is this.
The ones you come up with.
That, of course, was what Mitt Romney thought about a federal mandate back when he was running for president, before all the cool kids from the Republican Party were filing lawsuits claiming that a federal mandate is unconstitutional. But Mitt Romney is not alone. He never is. Mitt Romney is not alone in suddenly claiming that he believes requiring people to have insurance is unconstitutional, despite a very clear record that speaks otherwise. The fact is, the individual health insurance mandate is a Republican idea. Republicans came up with it. But as soon as the Democrats decided they agreed with the Republicans on that, Republicans changed their mind and decided it was horrible, awful, and unconstitutional. In 1993, Republican Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Orrin Hatch of Utah were co-sponsors of a health reform proposal, a Republican health reform proposal that included an individual mandate. But if you ask them what they think of the individual mandate today, now that Democrats have adopted it, now that Democrats have adopted their position on it, now apparently they are absolutely opposed to their own idea. Just this afternoon, NBC's Andrea Mitchell called Senator Grassley to account for his brand new take on the individual mandate he used to support.
You were one of the people who conceived the idea of the individual mandate back in 1993. You and the late Senator Chafee were trying to come up with an alternative, compromises in Hillary Clinton's health care proposals. Was it okay then, but now it's unconstitutional, or do you think these attorneys general are wrong about challenging the legality, the constitutionality of the individual mandate aspects of this?
No, I think they're right then, and I think the only difference between 1993 and the year now, if it was unconstitutional today, it was unconstitutional in 1993, but I don't think anybody gave it much thought.
We didn't really think about it back then when it was our idea. That's his answer. But now that it's the Democrats' idea, and I think about it now, it's totally unconstitutional, obviously. Incidentally, Senator Hatch, this amazes me. It's like they've coordinated this. Senator Hatch is offering up more or less the same totally inexplicable explanation.
Back on Hillary Care, they had a mandate in there, and I didn't realize it. I didn't pay any attention to it. We were trying to defeat Hillary Care. But the more I studied it since then, the more I've looked at it since then, the more I've come to the conclusion that it would be absolutely unconstitutional to force people to buy something they don't want to buy.
No. The mandate was your idea. It's a good thing they didn't pass your own proposal back then when you proposed it, Senator. Turns out you hadn't really thought about just how unconstitutional it was back then when it was your idea that you didn't know anything about. Joining us now is Ezra Klein, staff writer for The Washington Post. Ezra, thanks very much for coming on the